Hi, my name's Isabella. When I was 32, my sister twisted my arm so hard I couldn't move my fingers. Yet all my parents did was laugh. Walk it off! My dad clapped. Stop being a baby! My sister sneered. And my mom, she just smiled and called me useless. I thought it was just another cruel game until the paramedic's face turned pale and whispered, "Call the police." Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I promise you'll want to hear what the MRI revealed, because my family's secret. It was darker than anyone imagined. I remember the air feeling heavy that Sunday, like the Miami humidity had seeped into my bones. I had just clocked out of another long shift at the store, still in my faded retail uniform, the kind that clung to you no matter how much you wished you could shed it before walking into a crowd. But there was no time. My father had made it clear family gatherings aren't optional. So I drove straight from work, the steering wheel still warm from the sun, my chest tight with the same dread I always carried when I knew I'd be the punchline. As soon as I stepped through the back gate, I felt their eyes on me. The backyard looked picture perfect. The trimmed lawn, the grill-smoking neighbors and relatives balancing paper plates piled with food. I could see the polite smiles. They weren't really for me. They were for the image of a happy family my parents liked to display. Victoria spotted me first. She was standing near the patio, her sundress crisp, her nails done in a shade that probably cost more than my whole outfit. Her smile stretched wide, but I knew that smile. It was the one that always meant trouble. "Well, look who finally showed up." She called out, her voice just loud enough to cut through the laughter and clinking glasses. "Still rocking that glamorous retail uniform, huh?" A ripple of laughter broke out. Some nervous, some genuine. My cheeks burned and I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. I kept walking, clutching a paper cup of lemonade, trying to find a quiet corner. But Victoria wasn't done. She moved closer, lowering her voice just enough so only the nearest guests could hear. "You should thank me, Izzy. At least now you're providing the entertainment." I froze when she reached for my arm. "Victoria, don't!" I whispered, my voice already trembling. "Oh, come on. It's just a game. Remember when we used to play this as kids?" she said, with a mock sweetness that made my stomach churn. Her fingers wrapped around my arm, and before I could pull away, she twisted. The pain shot up so fast it stole my breath. "Victoria, stop!" But she only laughed. So sensitive as always. She sang out, turning so the guests could hear her. More laughter. My father, leaning against the grill, clapped once like he was at a ball game. She needed that. Might teach her not to talk back. The sting in my arms spread like fire. But what hurt worse were the eyes watching me. Some amused, some uncomfortable, none willing to step in. I tried to pull free, my voice breaking. "You're hurting me!" My mother, sitting on the patio with her wine glass, barely glanced up. "Useless girl, always causing trouble," she muttered, almost like it was an afterthought. Something in me wanted to scream, to shove Victoria away, to throw the cup in her face, anything. But another voice, the one carved into me after years of these games, told me to keep quiet. If I made a scene, I'd only prove them right, that I was dramatic, oversensitive, a burden. So I bit down on the inside of my cheek, willing myself to stay still, praying it would end quickly. The throbbing grew sharper, and I could feel my fingers stiffening. My breath came shallow, my vision blurring with tears. I refused to let fall in front of them. I forced myself to smile, though my jaw shook with the effort. "I'm fine," I whispered, mostly to myself. Victoria finally let go, flicking her hair back like nothing had happened. "See, she's fine." She looked around as if expecting applause, but I couldn't move my hand. Panic crept in, fast, cold, and undeniable. I tried to flex my fingers, but they wouldn't respond. A chill ran down my spine, stronger than the heat pressing on my skin. And that's when I realized this wasn't just another one of her cruel games. Something was terribly wrong. As I stared at my hand, my fingers refused to obey me. A dull panic rushed through my chest, heavier with every second that passed. My arm pulsed in waves of pain, and yet around me, the laughter continued like I was the evening's entertainment. Victoria grinned wide, brushing her hair behind her ear, her voice sharp enough to slice through me. "So sensitive as always," she sang out, leaning into the chuckles rippling through the crowd. My father's palms came together in a slow clap, like he was rewarding her performance. "She needed that," he said with a smirk, shaking his head, as though this were all some valuable lesson. Might teach her not to talk back. Every clap echoed in my head, betrayal louder than the throbbing pain in my arm. Across the patio, my mother sat back with her wine glass tilted against her lips. She didn't bother to hide her satisfaction. "Useless girl," she murmured almost too softly, but I heard it. "Always causing trouble." She sipped as if my humiliation was a drink she'd been waiting to savor. My throat tightened. I can't move my fingers," I whispered, though my voice barely carried past my own lips. My words vanished into the laughter. No one reached for me. No one asked if I was okay. I was the only one in that backyard who seemed to understand how wrong this was. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. I caught sight of a couple near the pool, their phones held up not to call for help but to record. My face burned with the shame of knowing I was nothing more than content for someone else's amusement. Part of me wanted to scream to force their attention to make them see this wasn't a joke. But another part, the part trained over years of being called dramatic, warned me that raising my voice would only prove them right. If even my own family thought I was exaggerating, why would strangers believe me? So I sat there, tears blurring the edges of the bright Florida sky, trapped in silence. It was then I noticed her, a young woman I didn't recognize, standing a few feet away, her plate of food untouched. She wasn't laughing. Her expression had gone pale, her eyes fixed on my hand. I followed her gaze and saw what she saw. The swelling had already started skin-tight and red against the knuckles. She stepped forward quickly, her voice cutting through the noise with urgency I hadn't heard all day. "Wait, stop!" Victoria turned, annoyance flickering across her face. "What's your problem? We were just playing." The woman didn't flinch. She crouched beside me, her eyes scanning my arm with focus. "This isn't a game. Look at her hand. Something's wrong." I blinked, startled by the firmness in her tone. No one had ever defended me like that in front of my family. "She's fine," my father said dismissively, waving a hand like he was brushing away a mosquito. "She always pulls this kind of stunt." But the woman's voice sharpened. "No, she's not fine." She looked up, locking eyes with the guests who'd been recording. "Put the phones down. Someone needs to call 911. For a second, the world froze. The laughter stumbled into uneasy silence. I could feel every eye on me, not with amusement anymore, but with a creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been lying. My chest heaved, the panic both sharper and softer now. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something besides humiliation, a faint spark of hope resting in the eyes of a stranger. And then her voice lowered, steady but urgent. "Don't move her. Something's wrong. We need to call 911. The moment Amanda's words cut through the air, it was as if someone had yanked the cord out of the laughter. The noise fell flat. The chatter, the smirks, the phones held up like weapons of mockery. Suddenly, they all stilled. I sat there on the patio chair, clutching my arm against me, as though I could hold the pain inside. The swelling was worse now, creeping across my hand, stiffening my fingers, until they looked like they belonged to someone else. My chest rose and fell too quickly, every breath jagged. But the hush that followed Amanda's voice pressed down even harder than the pain. She was at my side in an instant, kneeling so that her eyes met mine, calm and steady, in a way that made me want to cry even more. "Can you feel this?" she asked softly, her fingers brushing the back of my hand. I shook my head. It was all I could do. Behind her, my father let out a sharp breath, the kind that said he'd had enough. "She's being dramatic," he barked, throwing a glare around at the guests. "Walk it off, Isabella. You'll be fine." I flinched at his tone, as if his words alone could bruise me. My mother leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass, as if this were nothing more than background music. "Every time there's an event," she muttered with that familiar smirk, "she finds a way to make it about herself." The words hit harder than the ache in my arm. I swallowed, willing myself not to cry in front of them. Not again. Amanda didn't so much as blink in their direction. She slipped her phone from her back pocket, her movements deliberate, her voice low but firm. I'm calling 911. That broke the tension like glass shattering. A few guests looked at each other, the unease spreading across their faces. Phones that had been raised for recording were quietly lowered, tucked into pockets. Some cleared their throats, trying to look anywhere but at me. Victoria crossed her arms, her posture loud with defiance, even though her face had lost some of its shine. "Oh, come on!" she scoffed. But there was a flicker. Just a flicker of doubt in her eyes when Amanda gave her a sharp look. "You think I'm joking?" Amanda's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it carried farther than any shout. I wanted to sink into the ground. Part of me was terrified that if Amanda stayed, she'd end up the next target of their mockery. Another part of me, though, one I hadn't felt in years, clung to her presence like a lifeline. The guests shuffled whispers spreading like smoke. I caught phrases. "That doesn't look right. And should we?" Their uncertainty cracked the wall my family had built around me for so long. A memory surged without warning. I was 9 running through this same yard, knees scraped from a shove I'd never seen coming. Victoria had grinned then too, while Dad told me to toughen up. "Stop being a baby," he'd said, his voice dismissive, as he pulled Victoria close. Mom hadn't even looked up from her gardening gloves, and now here we were again. Same yard, same dismissal, same pain. Only this time, someone had finally seen me. Amanda put a steady hand on my shoulder, grounding me back into the moment. "You did the right thing speaking up," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "You're not overreacting. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Her words slipped through the cracks in my defenses, like sunlight through shutters. I nodded, though the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Not from weakness, not from shame, but from the jarring sensation of finally being believed. And then, faint at first, but growing louder, the sound reached us, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the Miami evening. The color drained from my father's face, not with concern, but with something colder. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, and I knew this wasn't over. The sirens grew louder, their echo bouncing off the brick houses of our neighborhood, painting the evening air with a shrill warning. My father's face flushed red, not from concern, but from something darker rage simmering just beneath the surface. I felt the weight of his glare, even as Amanda's calm voice tried to ground me. By the time the flashing lights spilled across the lawn, the guests had shifted nervously, some retreating closer to their cars. Others pretending to check their phones as if they hadn't been watching and laughing just moments before. 2 paramedics rushed through the gate with a stretcher. A woman with sharp eyes and steady hands knelt beside me. "I'm Susan Martinez," she introduced quickly, her voice brisk but kind. "We're going to take care of you. Can you try wiggling your fingers for me?" I focused all the strength I had left, willing my hand to move. Nothing. The panic surged higher. Amanda leaned closer to me. "It's okay. You're safe now." Behind her, my father stepped forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. "This is ridiculous. She's fine. She always pulls stunts like this." The paramedics ignored him. Susan exchanged a grim look with her partner, then whispered something I couldn't hear. I caught only the tightening of her jaw as she reached for her radio. My mother, still clutching her wine glass, shook her head with a sigh. "She'll be walking by tomorrow. You'll see. She's always been dramatic." Her words dripped like poison, casual but meant to wound. I wanted to scream that I wasn't making this up, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I whispered to Amanda, "I can't feel my fingers." Her eyes softened. "That's all I need to hear." The murmurs from the guests grew louder. I noticed a few of them lowering their eyes, as if shame had finally settled over them for the way they'd laughed earlier. Then a new voice broke the tension. A tall man in plain clothes, a badge clipped to his belt, stepped onto the driveway. "Detective Thompson." He introduced himself, scanning the crowd. "What happened here?" Amanda straightened her voice, calm and steady. Her sister twisted her arm. I saw the swelling. She couldn't move her hand. The detective's gaze flicked from Amanda to me, then to Victoria. My sister crossed her arms, her jaw tight, though for once she didn't rush to speak. My father's face went crimson. "This is a family matter," he roared. "You don't need the police in our home, sir," Thompson replied evenly. "When medical responders suspect abuse, It's my responsibility to be here. My mother chimed in quickly, raising her glass like she was toasting the absurdity of it all. My daughter's just dramatic officer. She does this for attention. The words sliced through me, leaving me trembling on the stretcher. For years, I had let them define me with those same dismissals, but something in Amanda's steady presence gave me the courage I hadn't known I still had. My voice came out small, shaky, but it was there. It's not the first time. The crowd froze. Even the hum of the radio seemed to quiet. I had never said those words out loud, not to anyone, not even to myself. The truth once spoken hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Detective Thompson studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "We'll take it from here." The paramedics lifted the stretcher, adjusting the straps as they prepared to move me toward the flashing lights in the driveway. My father lunged forward, his anger boiling over. "You'll regret this, Isabella. You've ruined everything." Those words pierced deeper than any twist of my arm, echoing louder in my chest than the sirens themselves as they wheeled me toward the ambulance. Those words followed me into the ambulance, echoing louder than the sirens. "You've ruined everything." I lay flat on the stretcher, the ceiling lights above me, passing in quick bursts as the paramedics pushed me through the ER doors. My arm was immobilized now, wrapped tightly, but the pain had spread deeper into my chest. My breath, even my bones. The sterile brightness of the hospital made everything feel surreal, like I had been dropped into a place that couldn't possibly be real. Amanda stayed close, her hand brushing mine before a nurse guided her back. I could still see her worried eyes as the curtain closed around my bed. Dr. Reynolds introduced himself quickly, his voice calm and firm. "Isabella, we're going to run some tests, including an MRI. We need to know the full extent of the damage." Before I could answer, my father's voice pierced the air. He'd managed to push his way in with my mother right behind him. "She doesn't need all this," he barked. "She'll be fine. She always bounces back." My mother crossed her arms, her wine-sweet breath filling the room. "She's wasting everyone's time," she added, her eyes rolling. Dr. Reynolds didn't even flinch. "Sir, ma'am, this isn't optional. I need to make sure she hasn't sustained permanent damage. Now please step aside." His words carried the kind of authority that made my father bristle, but even Nathan knew better than to push harder against a doctor in a hospital hallway full of witnesses. The detective appeared at the foot of my bed, his notepad in hand. Detective Thompson didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Isabella," he asked gently, "has this happened before?" My throat tightened. Images flashed through my mind. Victoria pushing me off swings, twisting my wrists during games, my parents laughing when I cried, telling me I was too sensitive. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Yes, since we were kids." The silence in the room was heavier than the machines around me. My mother's lips parted like she might speak, but nothing came out. My father looked away, jaw clenching so hard I thought he might break a tooth. Amanda slipped through the curtain again, ignoring their glares. She squeezed my good hand softly. "You don't have to be silent anymore," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. For a moment, I almost believed her. But guilt pressed hard against my ribs. Betraying my family, speaking those words, it felt like I had stepped off a cliff with no way back. The nurse returned to prepare me for the MRI. As she adjusted the straps, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the faint cracks to keep my mind steady. I tried to convince myself it wasn't too late to take it back. Maybe if I tell them I exaggerated, maybe if I just forgive them again, it'll stop. But then I heard my father's voice in my head, sharp and cold. "You've ruined everything." Something inside me shifted. No, I couldn't keep letting their words define me. I couldn't let them bury the truth again. When Dr. Anderson, the neurosurgeon, stepped in briefly to explain the scan, I listened carefully, nodding through the haze of fear. His tone was clinical, but the concern in his eyes was real. "We'll see exactly what's going on," he assured me. As they wheeled me toward the MRI room, Amanda's voice followed, firm but gentle. "You're doing the right thing, Isabella. Don't let them take this from you." The hum of the machine filled my ears as I lay perfectly still, the sound vibrating through my bones. My chest tightened with both dread and fragile hope. This machine will show the truth my family always denied. When the images came back, I wasn't ready for what they revealed. I lay perfectly still, the faint hum of the machine still echoing in my ears as Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Anderson entered the room together. Their faces told me more than I was ready to hear. Somber, heavy, as though they carried a truth too painful to deliver. Dr. Anderson pulled up the scan on a monitor. The gray and white images glowed in the dim radiology room, shadows cutting across the bones of my arm. This, he said gently, pointing with a pen, is a clean fracture. But there's more here. My breath caught. More. He clicked to the next image. You see these lines? His voice was steady but grave. They aren't from today. Some of these are older fractures untreated. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My heart pounded so loudly that his words almost blurred into the rhythm. Dr. Reynolds leaned closer, his tone firm but kind. These injuries happened at different times, months, maybe even years apart. They've healed unevenly. My father's voice cut through the sterile quiet, harsh and booming. She's always been clumsy, fell off bikes, tripped over her own feet. That proves nothing. My mother scoffed, her arms folded tight across her chest. She bruises like a peach, always exaggerating. You doctors are making a fuss over nothing. Their words sliced at me the same way they always had. But now, I wasn't alone in hearing them. Detective Thompson, standing just inside the doorway, didn't look away from the screen. His voice was calm, low, and certain. Isabella, he asked, have you been injured like this before? Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My lips trembled as I forced the truth out. Yes, since we were kids, they told me I was just sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. The silence that followed felt like the air itself had frozen. Amanda stepped closer, her voice quiet but unwavering. They gaslighted you. You doubted your own pain because they wanted you to. Her words cracked something open inside me. Years of brushed-off bruises, twisted arms, and mocking laughter rushed back. I had buried them so deep, I almost believed their lies myself. But now, staring at those images, I couldn't deny it anymore. The evidence was right there, etched into my bones. I wanted to collapse into the relief of finally being believed, but the grief hit harder. My entire childhood had been a lie wrapped in laughter and claps of approval. My father slammed his fist against the wall. This is absurd. You're poisoning her mind, filling her head with nonsense, my mother snapped. You'll regret this, Isabella. Family doesn't betray family. But Thompson stepped forward, his voice measured. This isn't betrayal. This, he gestured toward the glowing screen, is a pattern of assault, and it ends tonight. I looked at the detective, my breath shaky, my body trembling from more than the pain. Inside, guilt wrestled with a fragile spark of resolve. They'll never forgive me for saying it, but maybe I'll finally be free. Dr. Anderson rested a hand on the back of the chair. We'll treat the current fracture, but you need to know these scans prove there's a history here. You're not imagining this. For the first time, I nodded without doubting myself. It wasn't me, I whispered. I wasn't dramatic. They lied to me. Thompson picked up his phone, his expression unshakable. We'll need to file charges tonight. The room spun as his words sank in. Terror gripped me. Charges meant exposure, fallout, and a family that would never see me as one of them again. But beneath the fear, something new stirred. A quiet, fierce relief. They were no longer untouchable. Those words felt both terrifying and freeing. My parents were no longer untouchable. I barely slept that night. My body aching, my mind replaying every echo of laughter that had followed me since childhood. By morning, the hospital had shifted into its usual hum carts, rolling down the halls, nurses speaking in clipped tones, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. I sat upright in a stiff chair inside a small consultation room, my arm bound tightly in a sling, waiting for Detective Thompson. He walked in, carrying a manila folder, his expression calm but focused. Isabella. He began settling across from me. The medical evidence is clear. We have grounds for charges. My throat tightened. If I testify? I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. They'll hate me forever. Thompson didn't flinch. He leaned forward, steady and deliberate. They already made their choice when they denied you care. Hate isn't yours to carry. The The truth is, before I could answer, the door burst open. My father stormed in his face, red with fury. "We won't let her ruin this family!" His voice rattled the walls. Behind him, my mother glided in her wine-colored jacket, pristine, her chin tilted like a queen presiding over peasants. "After all we did for you," she hissed, "you repay us with this. Do you know what people will say?" I couldn't speak. For a moment, shame tried to choke me again, the same way it always had. Then Victoria followed, arms crossed, lips curled in a smirk. "So dramatic as always," she sneered. But for the first time, I saw her eyes flicker. Just a trace of doubt when Thompson placed the folder squarely on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We have your behavior on video. Multiple guests recorded last night." Victoria's smirk faltered. Amanda stepped in quietly behind Thompson. Her presence was steadying like a hand on my back I hadn't known I needed. "You're not alone anymore, Isabella," she said softly. The truth is enough. The room seemed to shrink around me. My pulse hammered as images from my past flashed across my mind. Birthdays ruined by sudden jokes that left bruises. Whispered insults disguised as laughter. My father's applause each time I cried. My mother's smile behind her glass. Every walk it off crashing over me like a wave. I drew in a breath, my chest tight, but my voice clear. I won't be silent anymore. My father's hand slammed against the table. "Ungrateful girl," he roared. My mother's eyes narrowed to slits. "Think carefully. Once you say this out loud, there's no going back." Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "So what? You think a courtroom will care about your sob story?" Thompson slid the folder toward me, opening it slowly. Inside were still images from videos. My sister's hand gripping my arm, my father clapping my mother's smirk. Proof I'd never had before. "They'll care when they see this," he said evenly. My breath caught. For years I'd lived in the shadows of their denials. And now here it was, my truth captured for the world to see. 1,000 fears ran through me, being disowned, cut off, labeled a traitor. Yet beneath them, something stronger pulsed. Maybe I'd lose them, but maybe for the first time, I'd finally gain myself. Thompson's gaze didn't waver. "They'll be served tonight?" The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents' faces drained of color. Victoria's smirk collapsing into a glare. I sat there trembling, knowing nothing would ever be the same. I thought that meant it was over. But my sister had one last move. By the time the sun dipped below the Miami horizon, the Rodriguez house looked like a stage under harsh spotlights. Red and blue lights from the squad cars painted the street. Neighbors stood on porches, whispering, some clutching their phones. The sound of police radios cut through the heavy air as officers approached the front door. Detective Thompson walked beside them, steady as ever. My chest tightened when Nathan shoved open the door before they could even knock. "You have no right to barge into my home," he bellowed, his voice carrying down the block. Carmen trailed behind, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that hadn't seen a real tear. She turned dramatically to the crowd. "This is a witch hunt. My daughter, our own flesh and blood, dragging us through the mud." I sat silently near the entryway, my arms still cradled in the sling. I could feel their eyes on me, neighbors, officers, even Amanda standing just behind Thompson. For a moment, I wanted to shrink back to disappear. Then Victoria appeared. She didn't storm or shout. She strolled in like she owned the place, holding a folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her face was calm, her lips curling in that all-too-familiar smirk. "Detective," she said smoothly, "before you embarrass yourself, you should see what my sister's been hiding." The folder landed on the table with a sharp thud. Inside were papers, medical notes, typed statements, even what looked like a psychologist's report. All of it painted a picture of me as unstable, dramatic, desperate for attention. My heart plummeted. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. "They'll never believe me now," I thought, my throat closing. Thompson opened the folder, carefully scanning the pages. His face gave nothing away. Nathan's chest puffed with triumph. Carmen straightened her shoulders like a queen regaining her crown, and Victoria leaned back, arms folded, her victory smile widening. For a few seconds, the silence in that room pressed harder than any words. My stomach turned. Years of humiliation and gaslighting whispered again. "See, you were always the problem." Then Thompson looked up, calm as stone. "Interesting," he said, evenly sliding the folder shut. "But these don't change the MRI scans." He laid another folder on the table, opening it to the images from the hospital. "These injuries didn't happen overnight. They tell a very different story." Victoria's smirk faltered. Before she could speak, Thompson continued pulling out a flash drive and signaling an officer. A small screen flickered to life as the video began to play. My breath caught. There it was, Victoria twisting my arm at the party, guests laughing, my father clapping my mother sipping her wine. Then me collapsing, clutching my hand, my face twisted in pain. The room shifted. Carmen gasped, her hand trembling around that useless tissue. Nathan's face darkened, and he slammed his fist against the wall, the sound echoing through the house. "This is ridiculous!" he barked, but his voice lacked conviction now. Victoria's smile was gone entirely. Her eyes darted to the neighbors outside, to the officers watching her every move, to Thompson's steady gaze. "I didn't move. I didn't plead. I didn't defend myself." Amanda's words echoed in my mind. The truth is enough. So I just sat there, my head held high as their empire of denial crumbled. Carmen whispered almost to herself. "This can't be happening," Nathan growled, pointing at me. "You've ruined everything." But for once their words didn't sting. They couldn't touch me anymore. Thompson stood, his voice firm. "Victoria Rodriguez," he said, locking eyes with her. "You're under arrest." The click of the handcuffs rang louder than the police radios, louder than the neighbors' murmurs. As the handcuffs clicked, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. 2 years later, the echoes of that night still find me sometimes. But now they sound different, softer, like reminders, not shackles. The afternoon sun slid through the blinds of my small Miami apartment, striping the living room floor in gold. I sat down, my mug of tea on the side table, my fingers brushing against the folded hospital wristband resting nearby. I never threw it away. That little band wasn't just plastic. It was proof. Proof that the truth had finally been seen. I leaned back on the couch, letting the silence settle. My phone buzzed on the cushion. A text from Amanda. Outside. "Got coffee. Hope you didn't forget the muffins." A smile tugged at my lips. Amanda, now a full-fledged nurse, had become more than the girl who knelt beside me in a backyard full of laughter and cruelty. She'd become family in a way I'd never truly known before. When she stepped in, the scent of roasted coffee filled the room. She handed me my cup, shaking her head. "Still the same order, black with 2 sugars, right?" "Some things don't change," I said, chuckling softly. We settled at the table, the hum of the city outside, faint against our conversation. Amanda's laughter filled the room, warm and easy. A stark contrast to the stifling silence I'd grown up with, where every chuckle felt like it was aimed at me. As we sipped, my thoughts wandered back to the trial. I remembered sitting in that cold courtroom as Dr. Anderson described the MRI images, how some fractures were months old, others years. I remembered the jury's faces when the party video played, showing Victoria twisting my arm, while my parents sat back and smirked. I remembered the judge's words. Parents are meant to protect, not destroy. Nathan and Carmen were sentenced for criminal neglect. They'd been released early now, serving probation. Rumor had it they were trying to find ways back into polite society. But not a day went by when I didn't think about their last message, passed along through a cousin. "We only wanted to toughen you up." I deleted it without a second thought. Victoria, though, had not been so fortunate. Convicted of aggravated assault, she was still serving her sentence. The smirk she wore that night had long since vanished in my memories. Amanda noticed me staring off and nudged my arm gently. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about how far we've come." Her gaze softened. "You're not just surviving anymore, Isabella. You're living." She was right. These days, I worked as a patient advocate at Miami General. I sat with people who felt small and dismissed, who were told their pain was all in their head. I listened, I believed, and I fought for them when no one else would. Maybe that was the truest kind of healing. Not forgetting, but using my own scars to help someone else see they weren't alone. Still, some nights the echoes came back. I'd wake up hearing my father's voice. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby." I'd sit up clutching that wrist. Story 2. Hello everyone! I apologize for disturbing your viewing, but kindly like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you! From the delicate fairy lights that were tastefully strung across the lawn to the exquisitely placed bouquets of white lilies that adorned each table, I have spent weeks painstakingly organizing my engagement party with Chris. I was meant to have tonight, the night when I would finally be the center of attention. Olivia's brilliant personality cast a shadow over Rebecca Harris, the timid sister who was often ignored. As we stood in front of our guests, champagne flutes raised in the air, getting ready to make our announcement, Chris gave me a comforting grip on my hand, and his soft smile steadied me, a recognizable clinking sound. Olivia's knife tapping persistently against her crystal glass filled the air as Chris opened his lips to speak. As soon as my sister, who was naturally beautiful in her bright red dress, got up from her chair, a familiar uneasiness began to creep into my chest. She had a naughty twinkle in her eyes. I was all too familiar. My accomplishments since infancy have been eclipsed by the same light-hearted disobedience. Olivia said, "I'm sorry to interrupt your little moment," taking a theatrical pause to ensure she had everyone's full attention. "However, I have some really exciting news about Jason. I have a baby!" Around us, gasps were heard, quickly followed by shouts, clapping, and happy laughing from friends and family who had turned their focus from my well-planned celebration to Olivia's unannounced news. The corners of her mouth curled upward into that recognizable grin as she turned to face me. "Sorry," she replied, her voice brimming with false regret. I guess I took center stage once more. The crowd erupted in laughter. My parents' happiness was evident and dazzlingly brilliant as they embraced Olivia with a big smile. Nevertheless, Chris and I remained motionless alone in the sphere of incredulity and annoyance that surrounded us. Impermeable, yet invisible. My meticulously planned moment, which was meant to finally legitimize years of silent sacrifices and underappreciated accomplishments, vanished in a matter of seconds as Olivia's easy charm engulfed me. I felt like an afterthought at my own celebration, because even Chris's mother hurried up to congratulate Olivia first. As the laughing erupted all around me, memories suddenly flooded my head, bringing back every instance from the past. This was exactly what Olivia had done. Olivia's entrance to her esteemed institution eclipsed my high school graduation, and the enthusiasm around her unexpected engagement announcement overshadowed my first art display. Even when I got my ideal job, Olivia's new house soon became the topic of talk at dinner. She subtly dominated my life, and this engagement party was just one more link in a lengthy chain. Chris tightened his grip on my hand once more, bringing me back to the here and now. His subdued rage reflected mine, his serene exterior barely masking the annoyance that burned behind his kind front. He leaned near, his breath warm on my cheek, whispering, "Give her this moment. We'll have ours soon enough." I felt the old animosity twisting uncomfortably within of me as I gazed at Olivia, beguiling everyone around her with ease and surrounded by admirers. Why did she have to take what should have been mine every time? What about my accomplishments and my joy that she just couldn't let show without her having to overshadow me? However, as my rage increased, a subtle yet potent notion kept creeping into my mind. It was subdued, graceful, but unquestionably powerful, the type of retaliation that would damage Olivia's dignity while seeming totally harmless to onlookers. With my voice calm despite the excitement pumping through my veins, I edged closer to Chris. My lips curled into a smile as I muttered, "Let's send out the save the dates tomorrow." For once, the smile matched Olivia's self-assured smirk. "Let's alter them, though. Let's make sure Olivia knows what it's like to be overshadowed at last." As if he had been waiting for this flame to burn inside of me for years, Chris's eyebrows raised slightly before his face lit up with a knowing grin. He reassured me that he stood firmly by my side, prepared to contribute to our relationship, and he murmured back, "I love you," with pride and something more in his voice. Unaware of the silent resolve that was growing between Chris and myself, the guests continued to speak and celebrate Olivia's announcement as the party went on. Olivia gave us a fleeting glance, her eyes glimmering with pride, confident that she had once again won. However, I made a resolute pledge to myself that this time would be different. Olivia would feel overshadowed, outwitted, and forgotten this time. I would finally be in the spotlight this time. The next morning, as I sat drinking my tepid coffee and planning our next course of action with Chris, the calm of our kitchen stood in stark contrast to the tumultuous emotional hangover still reverberating within my mind. Sunlight softly splashed upon the pale wooden table, covered with half-written vengeance scenarios, and drafts of save-the-date cards scrawled in my sloppy handwriting as it passed through the sheer white drapes. Some of these suggestions, such as planning the wedding around Olivia's birthday, or intentionally misspelling her name on the invitation, were ridiculously trivial. Small gestures that made me laugh for a while, but felt empty and disappointing in the end. After reading one of my more juvenile ideas that I had written at 3 a.m, Chris smiled gently, shook his head in loving amazement, crumpled it up, and skillfully tossed it into the overflowing trash can. After hours of iterations, we eventually created something nuanced but thought-provoking and unclear. Remember the date, intended to purposefully regain the attention Olivia had so easily taken away from me, not merely to reclaim our moment. We carefully considered which day would set off the ideal emotional storm. Olivia's due date was just 1 week away, and we knew that her insatiable bordering on pathological curiosity would compel her to learn about our plans. As a result, she couldn't help but take a glance at our announcement before anybody else did. I had a wave of exhilaration and nervousness after sending the cards to the printer, and I briefly doubted myself before Chris gave me a comforting shoulder squeeze. He gently smiled while brushing a stray hair behind my ear and said, "Relax," in my ear. "She's tired of being treated this way. It is now your chance to speak last." 2 days later, the peaceful rhythm of our breakfast was interrupted by the harsh, furious ringing of my phone. Olivia's name appeared in bold, angry characters on the screen. I paused for a moment, taking courage from Chris's unwavering stare, and then I picked up the phone and carefully pressed it to my ear, preparing for the impending storm. "Are you crazy?" Olivia's voice erupted instantly, every syllable pierced with hatred as her words were entangled in incredulity and indignation. "Did you really choose that day specifically? You are aware that my due date is just 1 week away." Even though her rage was strangely pleasurable, and a sign that my well-crafted message had struck the right spot, I still pretended to be politely perplexed and spoke cautiously. "Harmless. What date do you mean by your due date exactly? It was precisely 9 months after your announcement, if I recall correctly." "Correct. There should be enough time to prevent any disputes." Olivia saw my ridiculous arithmetic error during the brief quiet on the line. Her due date would naturally be considerably earlier, because she had, of course, revealed her pregnancy long after the fertilization. I was aware that the error would be readily apparent, maybe eliciting some humorous remarks from our friends on my mathematical prowess, but more significantly generating interest and responses to ensure that no one could overlook my point. Olivia swiftly recovered her calm, the hatred in her voice evident, and hissed furiously, "Oh, please! You are well aware of my baby's due date, and you purposefully choose that day to spoil my special occasion. You're attempting to ruin the best moment of my life." "Sabotage," I said calmly, listening to the faint shudder of real pain beneath her rage and momentarily questioning whether I had gone a bit too far this time. But then my engagement party memories came flooding back. As Olivia luxuriated in the attention she had so ruthlessly taken from me, I felt humiliated and heard vicious laughter reverberating about me. I inhaled deeply and examined myself, gathering all the courage I had suppressed for years of silent bitterness. "Olivia, isn't that funny?" I spoke calmly and carefully, relishing the strong sensation of control that swept over me. "Who is stealing now? Who is in the spotlight?" I could almost see her surprised face as the connection fell eerily silent, and I could picture the angry tears welling up in her eyes. Chris watched me closely from across the table, his eyes steady, but questioning, silently asking if I was truly comfortable with how far this had gone. Olivia had always assumed her position as the family favorite was secure, unquestionable, and never once suspected that I might dare to step out of my assigned role as passive supporter to challenge her. For a brief while, there was a heavy stillness between us, full with unspoken words, defenses, and accusations that were just out of reach and ready to break the tenuous calm. Olivia's shaky, shallow breathing betrayed the fragility she never let others see. Perhaps too late, I realized that retribution wasn't as sweet as I had thought it would be, and my heart squeezed at the sound. Olivia quickly ended the conversation, while I paused, leaving me with nothing but a void and unresolved questions. I carefully put the phone down, wondering if I had finally won the battle, or had just started one that I wasn't ready to fight, and felt the weight of my actions fall heavily on my shoulders. In the days after Olivia's irate phone call, rumors started to circulate among our relatives, dividing cousins, aunts, and uncles into opposing factions. While some vehemently supported my right to reclaim my moment, others angrily criticized my choice to hold the wedding so near Olivia's due date. Every whispered discussion seemed heavy with criticism, stress, and subliminal charges. And all of a sudden, every encounter became into a possible altercation, which left me feeling both alone and empowered. With flimsy attempts at mediation, hollow assurances, and thinly veiled requests that I just apologize and reschedule, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Every word, cloaked in cheesy civility, failed to conceal its actual meaning that Olivia's sentiments should once more take precedence over mine. When Olivia publicly posted on social media about her severe stress and emotional distress, claiming it could affect her pregnancy, the fallout escalated dramatically. This brave move immediately drew waves of sympathy from family members who rushed to her side, offering her reassuring platitudes and heartfelt support. Her writings, which were full of well-chosen words meant to evoke strong emotions, quickly portrayed me as heartless, self-centered, and even cruel, solidifying her role as the hapless victim and painting me as the bad guy. However, in spite of the harsh reactions, relatives who ought to have known better kept coming in. A tremendous sense of justification drove me to obstinately stick with my choice, hoping that Olivia wouldn't overwhelm me for once. However, Rebecca explains, nothing prepared me for the call from my mother, whose gentle yet unyielding voice easily triggered decades-old insecurity, cutting straight to my core. How were you able to? She started off with a tone that was laden with guilt, subtly accusatory, and exaggerated disappointment. Olivia's pregnancy is fragile, as you are aware. How could you purposefully give her this much worry on a day so near to her due date? Even I was shocked by my own reaction and the sheer passion that went into it. So I laughed bitterly. Mom, really? I felt years of repressed rage simmering perilously near the surface as I snapped back, my voice trembling a little. I'm still the villain, even after Olivia purposefully humiliates me in front of everyone by announcing her pregnancy during my engagement party. You've always been prejudiced. Do you even realize that the line was filled with my mother's agonizing stillness, which was heavy with anguish? However, spurred by the bottled-up rage, I moved forward instead of backing down like I usually do, breaking free at last. Olivia has eclipsed every significant event in my life, and each and every time you watched in silence, I never once acknowledged my feelings. She was always your favorite and your star. I was only an idea after the fact. My mother, obviously shocked and uneasy by my infrequent outburst, said hesitantly and tremblingly, "You know that's not true." She was anxious to maintain a story in which she was innocent, even though I've always loved you equally. Her phony assurance simply made me more resentful, which made my response harsher than I had intended. You loved me just as much. Yes, Mother, I said sarcastically, my tone rough and nasty. You sobbed when she announced her engagement and hardly blinked when I did the same. That's why you casually forgot about mine while throwing lavish dinner parties to honor each of her promotions. My feelings have never been as important as Olivia's. Don't dispute it. With every second that went by, the emotional gap between us grew wider. It was another long, agonizing quiet full of a lifetime of unspoken truths and hidden grudges. At last, my mother's voice was tiny and unsure, nearly whispering, "Rebecca, I'm sorry you feel that way. I didn't want for you to feel hated," but her apology sounded hollow and inadequate, incapable of mending the decades-old scars or bridging the emotional divide. Although I knew deep down that this conversation had been required, hanging up the phone left me exhausted, exposed, and terrified. The weight of our tense relationship was bearing down on me, a long overdue admission of facts that we had both disregarded. Even Chris saw the shift, putting his arms around me tenderly every night in an attempt to comfort me while his eyes showed signs of mounting nervousness and subtly asking me to think about letting go for the sake of harmony. "Perhaps you've made your point," he said carefully in a whisper. His steady voice had a faint note of dissatisfaction one evening, suggesting that even he was feeling the effects of this continuous struggle. Maybe it's time to let it go and go on without enduring the suffering any longer. Even though I knew he meant well, and that his kind comments were the result of sincere concern, I was nonetheless deeply irritated by them. I was frustrated that even my staunchest ally, Chris, suddenly advised me to back off. Was I really supposed to keep quiet again? I have to swallow my emotions and let Olivia in again. My phone rang loudly before I could reply, breaking the tension between us, as the screen brightened with quickly arriving alerts. Olivia had once again made a dramatic and public statement in which she claimed that I had always disliked having her in our family, subtly implying a more sinister reality. Everyone, including me, was left astonished and perplexed, looking blankly at the provocative message blazing violently on the screen. After her words sent shockwaves through our family, causing frenetic conversations and endless analysis. My pulse pounded with anxiety as I frantically wondered what secret Olivia might possibly divulge that I was unaware of. A secret so potent that it threatened to shatter all my preconceived notions about my own family. Olivia's cryptic clues stoked my interest, which soon turned into an obsession that took up every free moment of my day. I was determined to learn more about our family's complex past in order to uncover the truth hidden under layers of meticulously crafted tales. I spent days going through ancient family albums, dusty boxes containing school diplomas, childhood artwork, and long-forgotten diaries that were kept in our parents' attic. Every item of memorabilia I came across revealed tidbits of information I never would have predicted. A startling pattern soon became apparent among fading photos and scribbled notes, revealing something I had completely missed my whole life. Olivia's bright charisma and easy popularity belied deep-seated concerns that had been boiling under her self-assured exterior for years. It became evident to me, as I went over our academic records and other honors, how frequently our parents had disparaged Olivia in comparison to me. Teacher-written notes on report cards and letters home always emphasizing my accomplishments, but subtly implying Olivia's difficulties. Olivia's lively personality had always seemed unwavering, but it seems that she spent a large portion of our childhood in silence, fighting feelings of inadequacy that were overshadowed by my academic achievement and the quiet discipline qualities our parents publicly praised. Olivia never realized how much their subtle comparisons had hurt my sister. I struggled with the thought that the sister I had always viewed as self-assured and favored had actually felt just as inferior and overshadowed as I had. And learning these secrets left me feeling oddly terrible. Determined to confront Olivia about this, I arranged up a meeting at her favorite cafe, a neutral location that seemed absurd considering our turbulent past. As Olivia walked in, clearly agitated and ready for a fight, I pointed clumsily to the seat across from me, trying to seem humorous. "Olivia, calm down. No snatching of the limelight today, I swear. Just two dysfunctional sisters enjoying coffee." I tried to be funny, but Olivia rolled her eyes and laughed harshly, weakening my attempt. "Excellent. Sincerely, M2 is preparing for drama today." She let out a sigh, the tinge of her typical sarcasm offering a momentary but welcome respite from the tension that still pervaded our relationship. "I suppose you would find it humorous since drama is my area of expertise." Beneath the layers of bitterness and miscommunication that had recently characterized our conversations, I felt a glimmer of the old sisterly banter and smiled faintly. "It's funny how we always thought the worst of one another," I said softly as I looked her in the eye. While going through old family belongings, I discovered certain things that shocked me. Olivia's eyebrows furrowed as I began to carefully lay out the painful facts that Heidi had revealed, outlining the subtle but ongoing comparisons our parents had unintentionally made that shaped our ideas of ourselves and each other. Olivia was fascinated but hesitant. Initially listening in silence, Olivia's countenance was a complex blend of humiliation, despair, and rage, all of which were obviously at odds with one another and threatened to overpower her carefully maintained poise. Olivia's shields finally gave down a little, and she leaned forward, her voice tinged with unvarnished honesty. "You don't understand, Rebecca," she said sourly, her eyes glimmering with hardly contained tears. "You have always had skill knowledge and respect from everyone, including Chris, who genuinely loves you. Being entertaining, well-liked, and the person that everyone liked at gatherings was all I ever had. However, I knew in my heart that I would never be able to compare to you in any significant manner. I was shocked by the intensity of real suffering underlying her statements, which made me reevaluate my preconceptions about her ostensibly easy existence. Olivia. I let out a little sigh, fighting to maintain my composure as guilt instead of victory suddenly overcame me. Olivia interjected, shaking her head fiercely, and her voice vibrating with unfiltered anger. "All this time, I thought you purposefully overshadowed me because you enjoyed seeing me struggle," she said. "No. It wasn't about you that I announced my pregnancy at your celebration. It was my frantic, self-centered endeavor to be unique and to have a success of my own that no one could disparage in comparison to yours." "Horrible, huh?" I responded with ironic humor to cover up my inner weakness, and I chuckled bitterly as the ridiculousness of our lifetime miscommunication suddenly became apparent. We are both aware that insecurities are our family's expertise. Perhaps we need to give our parents credit for making treatment a permanent requirement. Olivia gave a sincere, if little grin, as she sighed deeply and reclined in her chair, obviously worn out by the weight of our discoveries. Rebecca said in a low voice, "I don't know if we can ever fully move past this, Rebecca," in a somber and thoughtful tone. "There have been too many years of animosity between us." The reality in her statement made my heart sink, and I instantly realized how pointless my retaliation had been. The joy I had expected was replaced with a sobering realization of the emotional price we had both paid. I gave her a hesitant nod, comprehending her hesitancy, and wondering if the harm we had caused could be repaired or buried. Beneath our resentment was the tenuous prospect of recovery. Olivia's face changed suddenly before I could reply. Darkening a little, her eyes narrowing suddenly with passion, her voice falling conspiratorially. "Rebecca," she said warily, her tone tinged with apprehension, "you ought to be aware of something else as well. Mom always knew this. Something about you." She skipped uneasily and never shared my emotions. Olivia's cryptic statements caused me to become immediately uneasy and anxious for answers, making me doubt everything I had ever thought about my family and myself. I felt a sharp rise in confusion and fear. Sleep remained impossible in the days after Olivia's disturbing disclosure, as an unrelenting dread twisted my stomach into painful knots and pushed me in the direction of the awkward conversation I knew I could no longer avoid. As I approached the familiar porch in the evening, I picked a time when I knew my mother would be by herself, sipping tea quietly in the soft glow of her favorite reading lamp. Anxiety tightened around me, like a heavy cloak, making each step up the stairs harder than the last, weighted by years of unspooling resentments and newly discovered uncertainties. My mother answered the door slowly, obviously aware of the seriousness of my unexpected visit. Her eyes were cautious and apprehensive, but they couldn't hide the intense maternal tenderness beneath her tense face. She motioned me inside, and the door closed softly behind us, the click resonating through the house with a finality that unnerved us both, and meant that whatever secrets lay between us were about to permanently change our family. My pulse was racing as I sat across from her, and my bravery wavered for a second before regaining it and asking the question that had been bothering me for days. My voice cracked a little beneath the intensity. "Olivia implied that you've kept something significant about me a secret all of my life, Mom. Tell me what's happening, please." My mother was obviously struggling with a lifetime of grief and shame, as her eyes immediately filled with tears, her shoulders quivering slightly as she gripped her teacup hard, her knuckles becoming white from the emotional strain. At last, she drew a trembling breath, her voice weak and frail as she spoke quietly, picking words carefully as if they were all too heavy. "Rebecca, you had a twin sister at birth, a lovely and ideal little girl we called Elizabeth. She died soon after, leaving a hole in our hearts from which we never fully healed. It was impossible for me to properly register her words, let alone comprehend the implications that lay behind them. As my breath caught in my throat, and my astonished disbelief mixed uncomfortably with the anguish and uncertainty that instantly overcame me. My mother persisted shakily, making a valiant effort to keep everything under control. But it was obvious that she was battling with the reality that she had concealed for decades under layers of tactful quiet. We were almost ruined by the loss. Rebecca's absence tormented your father and me, and we thought we would never be able to get over our grief. Olivia restored hope and pleasure to our family when she entered our lives through adoption. However, the thought of her ever feeling alienated was too much for us to handle. We told ourselves it was best for you both, so we kept the truth from you. The room swung slightly about me as the realization of this fact sent a shockwave through my heart, leaving me feeling lightheaded and confused. I was overcome with grief for a sister I had never knew existed, and sympathy for the mother whose unseen suffering influenced so many of our decisions. But before I could say anything, we were both shocked by a sudden cry from behind. We turned swiftly to see Olivia standing motionless in the corridor, her face white, her emotions contorted with a mix of anguish, amazement, and beginning understanding. Olivia had been whispering hoarsely the entire time, her voice laden with sadness and terrible disbelief, tears already silently running down her cheeks. My fears weren't unique to me. You also didn't tell me about this. You gave me the impression that Rebecca detested me because I was just insufficient. But in fact, I was always attempting to fill the impossibly large gap left by Elizabeth. In a desperate attempt to win Olivia's forgiveness, my mother wept gently and reached out to her. However, Olivia flinched back, shaking her head angrily, overcome by a lifetime of abruptly redefining ties and emotions. Instead, she turned to face me, her eyes beseeching me to understand, silently pleading with me to affirm that she was still my sister. Our parents' well-meaning deceit had unintentionally created emotional isolation. Tears obstructing my eyes, I approached Olivia and gently grasped her shaking hand. The touch of her palm felt both familiar and somehow unfamiliar, as if we were now seeing each other fully. "Olivia," I said, my voice full of sincere passion, "you've been my sister forever. I apologize. We both misunderstood one another for a very long time." She squeezed my hand tightly and nodded softly. The shaky prospect of reconciliation hasn't yet been authentically infused into our hesitant embrace. Even yet, we both understood that it would take time and attention for our shared wounds to completely heal. Our mother, who was obviously divided between relief and guilt, as she watched us, sobbed quietly, thankful that her daughters may find peace, but yet heartbroken by the harm caused by decades of silence. In the weeks that followed, Chris and I carefully rethought our wedding preparations, deciding to recognize our true love and celebrate our own personalities rather than being driven by competitiveness or retaliation. Each of us fought to get our save-the-date back. Spotlight theft, which had been used as a weapon against Olivia, now represented my freedom from familial concerns and my bold entry into a future characterized by individual authenticity rather than continual comparison. At the last fitting for my wedding gown, I stood silently next to Olivia, our reflections blending together in the mirror. I was surprisingly at ease after realizing how intricately self-worth and family competition interact to shape each of us in both obvious and subtle ways. Our tentative, wary but hopeful hug was a realization that in spite of our disagreements, miscommunications, and emotional wounds, our sisterly tie was sincere and strong, able to withstand even the most trying circumstances. When I honestly thought back on this path, I realized that reconciliation was neither straightforward nor comprehensive. It took constant work and vulnerability tolerance for flaws, and the guts to face unpleasant realities head-on in order to be really forgiven. However, I knew that we had made the first important steps toward healing when we stood together as sisters bound by secrets, wounds, and at last, true understanding. We had moved past our shared past and into an uncertain but hopeful future, which caused everyone, including myself, to think carefully about their own lives and unresolved relationships.